in 50 years in the U.S.
Yeah.
1963, October 1, when I got my formal employment at Columbia University. So last October, I finished 50 years of teaching. And therefore, you have a lot of, like many people in the audience who are more senior to me, you have seen experiences over time. And like many things, the business school, education, and institutions have gone through ebbs and flows of their own, which I will talk for a moment. Second major event in 2013 is that I also turned 75 years old. So it's a nice event to recognize. You know, my view is that I think we are so workaholic people, we don't take time out to celebrate ourselves, you know. But, so we should celebrate. And the third event where Vivek was there, Vivek Mehra from SAGE, coincidentally, he makes sure he shows up. We also celebrated, my wife and I, 50 years of wedding anniversary. So I mean, it's a reflection, it's a nice life in some. We are blessed essentially. I do want to talk about two different aspects of the business education. The first one is what's happening in the US and why. And the second one, what is likely to happen in India and why. I'll divide the work into two parts. The in the US is going through a midlife crisis. Only MBA education, not BBA education. Unfortunately, in India, everything we think is MBA education because that is how we began with IIMs. And therefore, the undergraduate side of business education is what we call commerce primarily. But there's a whole phenomenon that I'll talk about as a great opportunity in India, while the MBA itself will go through a shakeout, literally. Like all startup industries, we will have a major shakeout in this country. We are going through a midlife crisis over there with MBA. MBA program was created in the late 50s by two commissions by the government. All engineers who were graduating when they joined industry absolutely had no knowledge of basic vocabulary like a micro and macroeconomics, demand and supply, double entry system. And industry began to find that they had to educate them. They shifted the burden on the society by creating two commissions who said that fresh engineers, rather than joining the corporation at the age of 21, 22, must actually study 2 more years, straight education, as we have it in this country even now. And that continued, and they joined a corporate life, as in my generation, you started with a company and you retired with a company. We had people like that who joined General Motors, joined General Foods, General Electric, General anything. That was the norm. That shifted significantly with a change in the student composition. First, not the curriculum. In the energy crisis of 74, 72, 74, or 74, 78 roughly, we found that many smart kids, undergraduates, who obviously were in liberal arts like humanities, history, sociology, had no jobs. For the first time in the US, education was looked upon as an investment in time and money for a return, for a job. Before that one, education was, especially in the liberal arts, just for self-enlightenment. It was not an occupational requirement like a chartered accountancy, for example, or medical degrees, or engineering. That was very interesting. So these liberal arts students began to apply for MBA right after their undergraduate degree with no work experience, and they were so smart. They were smarter than the engineers, which came as a shock to us as educators. I was an administrator even, so I began to see the application pool shifting dramatically, especially at what we call state universities, which are like government universities. I was at University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign, Similarly, you will have the University of Michigan, UC Berkeley on those ones, UCLA, they're all state universities where you have these large undergraduates come in from high school and of course the graduate education. It was very fascinating change. Then the change happened a little later on in the 80s and the 90s when we began to find that our graduates were not going to the traditional corporation but were being hired by consultancy firms and eventually by investment bankers. Remember, 80s was the time when the private equity took hold of the nation's capital, not public equity. You saw the rise of KKR. Warren Buffett became one of the most richest people during that time. Public equity had collapsed completely. These great conglomerates had to be broken up by somebody from outside. They were cheap buys. Coca-Cola was invested by Warren Buffett and created a value. So investment bankers began to identify smart young people. Suddenly today, fast forward maybe 15, 20 years, 75% of our MBAs go only in two industries, management consultancy and investment banking, for which the curriculum was never designed. So we have a crisis. The first year MBA curriculum was designed just to give a vocabulary, what we call the core program. And the recommendation by the commissions was that the first year ought to be primarily foundational, 2 courses in behavioral sciences, 2 courses in quantitative sciences, and 2 courses in economic sciences. Then the second year is that you get an introductory knowledge about marketing management, or marketing at one time, not even management. Introductory notion about finance, accounting, and that was a general MBA. Just a vocabulary. My view is that MBA is nothing more than just understanding a vocabulary of an industry. There is no depth of knowledge. Depth of knowledge was earlier, like in social sciences or in engineering. A smart undergraduate wants to continue rather than get a job, a graduate program as we call it postgraduate here. And so he or she went for an MS degree, you might remember? MS in finance, MS in marketing, MS in accounting, etc. And then if they were smart enough and dedicated enough, they were screened out to say only about 10-15% will do the PhD. That was the old model of graduate education, which MBA changed eventually. Right? So MBA is in crisis. Why should we have 1 year of nothing but behavioral, quantitative and economic sciences? So we are all collapsing that. If you want to go to investment banking, you need probably 12 to 15 courses in finance, all the way to derivatives. So many smart kids, what they are doing is that they take 1 semester equivalent of core and then immediately go into finance. So today's MBAs is like the old MS in finance, although the degree is called MBA. One more change took place. Management consultants began to realize that these young people have no understanding of corporation. They're supposed to advise senior executives who in a meeting suddenly look upon this young kid in their 20s and say, he reminds me of my son or my daughter. Suddenly there is this connection now. So they began to insist, especially among private universities like Harvard, Dartmouth, Wharton, Northwestern, Stanford, to only now recruit for MBAs those who have work experience, which means they understand organizational design, organizational politics, hierarchy, and all this stuff. So when they walk into the environment, they're quite familiar how to deal with that. And remember, when you are working for a consultancy firm, you are a revenue producer, whereas when you work in a corporation, you are a management overhead cost. And as a revenue producer like sales, you will pay any money, so long as they generate money. So we corrupted the whole system by management consultants paying outrageous salaries and bonuses. It's happening here, but ours has gone to 75% of all graduates. After 4 or 5 years of work experience, which is like a minimum average requirement at my university, for example, here is a person who is in his late 20s now, And now we have equal numbers of men and women. It used to be only men because they were engineers, but with liberal arts, more and more women began to apply. Very fascinating. They have an enormous debt, actually. They borrow money to do their MBA, which means their interest is to how quickly can they get in, get the degree, not knowledge, not learning a dimension, and get a job. So they're into clubs all the time, consultancy club or case writing club. They want to get an internship job very quickly, like at the end of the first semester. Seriousness of learning has gone away from MBAs as it used to be when there was a fresh undergraduate. Because what we teach in the first year, these guys have all experienced in the corporation for 5-6 years. There's nothing new. They're smart kids, that's not the question. But they have no motivation to learn because there is very little except you go into the specialized courses like in finance, corporate finance, the derivatives, etc. Or in CRM, in marketing or something like that where they have to learn new skills. This is now creating a midlife crisis for us. What should the MBA be all about? And now more and more, we are finding that even within consultancy, they don't want a general strategy person. They want somebody. In the marketplace, there are very few professors who know how to teach. In marketing, branding is irrelevant. What you need is social media. And how do you market social media? Not the traditional advertising and communication. And I can go on in accounting the same way, any field. So now you have a disconnect between what the market needs, wants, versus what the faculty is all about. Faculty has never gone back and for recertification, as they do in the medical field, as they do in professional fields. So we are now questioning whether our faculty is more obsolete than what the technology is all about and the young kids are all about. There's another disconnect we are getting. So we think that our MBA over there will go through a transformation. In the short run, we also have survived from the revenue of 2-year MBAs to creating this executive MBA. You might remember? Working managers, where we teach them on the weekend. And because they were funded by the corporations, we could charge even higher prices. That is about to come to a stop. No corporation now funds executive MBAs. It's all paid. So we have a problem at universities, and we are at top 20 universities, the same nightmare, that our executive MBAs are paying out of their pocket, and actually they join executive MBA program to exit the company. Are you with me? Rather than as a career path to become the CEO of the company. Mind-boggling. 60% of our executive MBA people paying $100,000 for the program, 16 months, are now looking for a career advice, which we never organized for them. Now we have created a modular executive MBA. That means they come in residency for a week, and everything is done by distance learning, and they do it like over 2 years, and we charge even more ungodly number for that. It's just not sustainable. There is no economic viable proposition. So now we are inventing a new front which impacts emerging economies. We have certainly discovered that the bigger gold mine is not in America or in Europe, but it is all in emerging economies. Even though the percentages may be small, the absolute numbers are staggering. And by the way, biggest gold mine American MBA program directors have found is China. Every one of them has an executive MBA program, world class. All their faculty fly out to Shanghai or Beijing or someplace, and they have an enormous profitable center. They're looking at other places. So are the Spanish business schools. So are, in fact, expanding. We are expanding into Dubai and any places where the brand equity matters, which says that they will come to India whether they like it or not. And the only reason they're not coming to India is not because of the market opportunity, but because of the regulatory uncertainty. They don't know who will regulate them and how. That's the big. So in one way, for us it's an advantage because they are now very worried about it. But I think this government will create a fourth front of education. You had the UGC front, and then the AICTE front. Then we created under Pawan Agarwal, as you know, a third front, which is these private universities. The fourth front will happen no matter which government comes, in my view, right after the elections, which says we will allow foreign universities with complete autonomy to have their campuses here. Now the game changes on the Indian business schools. If I can, ISB is sort of the hybrid of that piece. Indian School of Business has done fantastically well even on their second campus because faculty is all from foreign countries, primarily from world-class institutions. They are great teachers and they are great scholars if you analyze all of the people who come and teach, and that's going to change the paradigm. My view is that in the Indian situation now, we are going to definitely have shake-up. I also believe that while the distance learning, what they call MOOCs, is like any other phenomenon. I remember my days of correspondence schools. How many of you remember we got the exams at home and all the stuff? We used to laugh at those guys. Then we had this all education by satellite, remember? These guys are serious, they will become legitimate. What is peripheral becomes core, what core will become peripheral is clearly what we are seeing out there. And by the way, in the US, MOOCs were laughed at by top universities. Today, all top universities are offering their courses, not in business yet, it's a matter of time, under the MOOCs. So our music professor, who is a world-class professor, can only teach clinically piano playing or whatever it is for maybe 20 students, gets onto Coursera and has about 10,000 students. University makes a lot more money on that one professor now as a revenue producer. Are you with me?
Yep.
Changes the paradigm completely. So now you have world-class faculty coming anywhere. Watch that trend. What is not legitimate, very legitimate phenomenon. And not the way we have done it, our distance education. Very interesting. My own view is that our MBA programs here will continue to thrive, especially at well-respected institutions who have a brand equity, good curriculum, and good placement. But the system is already hiring now. Amit has better numbers than I have. Probably 15 to 20% are going into management consultancy and investment banking, whether those are multinationals, like McKinsey type or BCG type, or those are in fact, domestic consultancy firms. And that's going to change the paradigm here. It's a matter of time if you extrapolate again that. I just heard about offering an MBA. I was mentoring the young woman in Ahmedabad yesterday, just for women politicians, who said they don't need business education. All IS officers need business degrees. So there's a whole new market, and we are so entrepreneurial in this country that we'll scramble and discover that, and we'll figure out how to offer, as opposed to the traditional MBA going into the traditional market value. Okay? Now the other major opportunity. So I do believe that one of the key ingredients for MBA is going to be creating global reputation. And the way to create global reputation is to absolutely go out of your way to seek for global accreditation, not domestic accreditation. So even if you are certified by AICTE, it makes no difference, either in the demand side or on the reputation side from attracting faculty. So one has to shift that whole paradigm of global accreditation, whichever the bodies are. That's clearly one. And I'll take one more minute. I know we have a time constraint, so I'll talk about that one. And the last one is that I think the biggest paradigm shifter in India, unlike us over there, is the government policy. This is the only country, as we analyze the data across all fields of higher education, we have experimented more than anybody in the world in the way we have changed the program from a standard 12-year of high school. How many of you remember PUC program? Remember? I graduated before called intermediate. Remember 2 years of after 12-2. Then we created the PUC. Now we have a 10+2. It was designed because government cannot fund 12 years of high school, which is free education. So government was very smart to say, people who are not interested, why? Let them go into vocational jobs. And we have done more experimentations in this thing than any other nation. So this government will again change the paradigm of higher education by policy. So I would watch the policy people with more intent than I would watch the market demand, for example. I think policy will shape a lot more than we realize in this country. Okay? Wherever the policy comes from, just keep that comment and we can debate and discuss that comment. I'm deliberately creating some provocative ideas so we have a dialogue. Okay? My own passion in this country in business education is the undergraduates. From high school, we can create the IITs of business schools, like IITs, which begins from 10 plus 2, right? That pool is so large, but don't train them like the typical commerce majors. I would put a 4-year program, not 3 years, 10 plus 2 plus 4, maybe 5, and I'll come to 5. The 4-year, first 2 years is liberal arts mandatory. Nobody can ever lead or manage without having a humanities in their own understanding. In my generation, we started with accounting right after high school, right? Commerce. We sprinkled a little geography, history, basic classics people have to study. People have to study theology, philosophy, cultural aspects. First 2 years, and one can offer them the next 2 years business education because we can do it in 2 years of MBA anyhow. That market is so large in India and so much needed that then after 4 years, like IIT graduates, they immediately go into corporate world, not into consultancy world. I can add 1 more year and get an MBA if they wanted an MBA, but in linkages. So I've been creating programs where in the second year after the liberal arts education, the student has an internship in a company from the sophomore year, as we call it. Internship every summer, they are doing it. Last almost half a year, they are in the company working as a part of their program. And then we link it with a university where they go there for less than a year or a year because curriculum is tight, and they get an MBA from a well-reputed institution if you're looking for global reputation of some sort. Very doable. Cost is low. They get the global experience. That's clearly one. I do believe that this government probably will mandate on business education at the MBA level right now that we have to have our students, before they graduate, understand about the global workplace, global marketplace. We are now almost insisting that going abroad is not a choice. Internship should be done abroad, for example, as a part of the curriculum. We have a program where all students, our MBA program, have to go abroad. We used to do it for executive MBA, now it's for every student. And we are about to mandate for our undergraduates also in the business school, for example. That's where the reality is going, right? So I will stop here making more comments, and then we can have my colleagues, obviously, who are very deeply involved in the Indian scene, talk about it, and then we can pick up questions and answers. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Sheth. Before I invite...